6:30 exactly, but I have not heard, we heard from Quincy, but I have not heard from Raul, so we can give him a minute and then we can get started. We'll allow another minute or so. We'll give him until 6:31 according to the clock on my computer, which should probably be the same as everybody else's.
Except for the clock on the city computer, which we cannot adjust. That's only done by IT. So mine's still an hour off.
Only for a few more months.
Look at that.
It'll be back again.
Just a reminder, as we're doing roll call, remember to say your name and say that you are attending virtually from wherever your location is. So as an example, Nathan Box attending virtually from beautiful Holland, Michigan. And we've got Raul on. I think we've got everybody that we're going to have. So I'm going to call the meeting to order this evening. This is the January 6, 2020 regular meeting of the Holland City Council. And Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Bird. Peters.
Here.
Garcia.
President attending via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Rethui.
Here and attending via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Arnshorst.
Nikki Arenshorst attending via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Corbin.
Here, attending via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Hoekstra.
Present, attending via Zoom from Holland, Michigan.
Raymond.
Lynn Raymond attending via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Mayor Box.
Nathan Box attending by teleconference from beautiful Holland, Michigan.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. We're going to begin our meeting tonight, as we have for many years, with an opening prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Each is important every night that we meet, but tonight they're especially important. I'd ask that you join me in prayer, and because our meeting tonight is in Zoom format, I'm going to remain seated during the prayer, but then I'll stand, and we should all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. So let us pray together. Lord, today was a difficult day for our nation. As I watched the news today, I was dismayed. I need your help and your guidance. We need your help and your guidance. I love this country. I love our community. I love to serve. The people that we serve are our family and our friends and our neighbors. In college, I was an intern on Capitol Hill. I walked its halls, ate lunch on its steps. I was humbled by the thought of the great leaders who built this nation, and I'm still in awe of all that it represents. We're a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. But today I saw those familiar places in a way that I'd never seen them before, in a way that I never would have imagined, and I'm shocked and I'm saddened. Lord, we need your help. We need your help to listen to one another. We need you to help us to hear one another. We need you to help us talk with one another and not past one another. If we're going to serve your people, we need your help. We need your help to be examples to our community and to the world. Each of us came to this place because we love our community. We love its people. We want to serve. We don't always agree, but we pledge to work together despite our disagreements. We've dedicated ourselves to civil discourse, to talk with one another respectfully, and to work to find common ground in the service of your people. We've dedicated ourselves to civic engagement, to remember that we serve your people, and to always remember that it's an honor and a privilege to do so. Help us make sense of today. Help us be good servants of your people. Help us be examples so that we can help lead the way in moving our country beyond the ugliness of today. Lord, we're one nation, under God, indivisible. Help us create liberty. Help us ensure justice. Help us serve your people humbly, today and every day. Amen. Stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to
Salute
the
the
flag
flag of the
of the
United
United
States
States
of
of
America.
and to the
To the
republic
republic for
which
which
it
it stands,
one nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty.
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. The next item on the agenda is our consent agenda items. These items are considered to be routine and have previously been reviewed by council. They will, unless a member of the audience or a member of the council asks to have an item removed, they will all be enacted in one motion. Kathy will read or summarize the items that are on the consent agenda. Then I'll ask if there's anyone from the public who would like to have an item removed, and then I'll ask council to do that. So Kathy, would you please review the consent agenda for us?
Item 4A, absence excused, Councilmember Byrd. 4B, approval of minutes, December 16, 2020, virtual regular meeting. 4C, oaths of office. 4D, city clerk, claim filed against the city. 4E, city clerk, ordinance to adopt the recodification of the ordinance codes. Final adoption, January 20, 2021. 4F, finance, West Michigan Enforcement Team, Earned Justice Assistant Grant approval, October 2020 through September 30, 2020. G, finance, November financial reports. H, finance, fiscal year 2020 annual investment report. I, finance, account with Huntington Securities, adopt resolution. 4J, finance, small claims court use, adopt resolution. 4K, police division, approval of the Ottawa County Mutual Aid Agreement for police services. 4L, management and administrative services, Board of Review, reappointment of city officers. 4M, management and administrative services, city finance director, assignments to boards and commissions.
Thank you, Kathy. Is there any member of the public who would like to have an item removed from the consent agenda and placed in its regular order on the regular agenda? Seeing none, is there any member of council who would like to have an item removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda? Seeing none there, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Motion to adopt agenda as presented.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
I'll give that one. How about Mr. Garcia? Consent, seconded by Garcia. Any discussion? All those in favor? Oh, we need to do a roll call vote. Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Peters,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Corbin,
Yes.
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Yes.
Raymond, Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item, item number 5 is public comment. We provide the opportunity for the public to speak at all of our public meetings as part of the Open Meetings Act. We limit public comment at regular city council meetings to 5 minutes. We do not have a timer system to show you. I see Mr. Zylstra is there, so I'm assuming you're going to be doing that. So I'm speaking directly to you, Doug. You're going to have to keep track of your own time there, although Mr. Van Dyken will also be keeping track of the time. And if you go over 5 minutes, he's going to mute you. He's going to mute you. So keep an eye on your time. Having said that, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to council at this time? Yes, Mr. Zylstra. Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Doug Zylstra, 152 East 24th Street, Ottawa County Commissioner for the City of Holland. Today is a difficult moment, as the mayor says, and our thoughts and prayers are surely with all those in the U.S. Capitol today working for peaceful democracy and against cynical extremism and violence. I did come here to talk to you about vaccinations in Ottawa County. Vaccine distribution in Ottawa County is in its third week. We've distributed 4,721 doses through both the health department and our healthcare partners in the county. Over 8,000 doses have been distributed by the federal long-term facility program. Ottawa County is listed at Michigan.gov as one of the better performing counties in terms of doses administered, so I think we can be happy with that. You may have seen that the governor has opened up vaccinations to category 1B and 1C. However, due to the high number of healthcare workers in Ottawa County is still in phase 1A, and we'll see when we get to phase 1B and 1C. Most importantly, for Ottawa County residents who are interested in getting a vaccine, and I hope that's all of us, Ottawa County residents can sign up to receive the COVID-19 vaccine by going to myottawa.org, navigating to the COVID update page, and clicking the big red "I want the vaccine" button. I think I made it nice and clear as to what the goal is there. So click the button. You'll need to provide your contact info and which vaccination phase best describes you. Public Health will notify you via email when and where you can receive the vaccine. Just please note that the phases are not necessarily sequential. We're not going from 1A to 1B to 1C. There's going to be some blended sequences there. So hopefully we get through the sequences as soon as we can and we get the doses we deserve from the state. Again, visit Vaccinate West Michigan, vaccinatewestmi.com for the latest information on COVID-19 vaccine availability. And if you have any questions, please reach out at my cell phone at 443-4281 or email dziles@myottawa.org.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Is there anyone else here from the public who would like to address council at this time? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period. And I believe the next item on our agenda is item number 9, written petitions and communications. In this age of COVID, it's not as easy or as safe for some folks to be able to come directly to council meetings or to sign on to the Zoom meetings. So we developed a website, or excuse me, an email address, publiccomment@cityofholland.com, where members of the public can send communications directly to City Council. Those have been reviewed by City Council. We do not read them at our meetings, but we do accept them into the public record, and they are part of the packet so that anyone who wants to read them can read them through the city's website. I believe that we have 3 e-comments in regard to energy and 4 e-comments regarding the Unified Development Ordinance. And I would now entertain a motion to accept those into the record.
So moved.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
Who was that? Thank you, Lynn. Support by Raymond. Any discussion? And we're gonna, even though it says voice vote, we are gonna do a roll call vote. We want to do roll call votes on all of these items when we're on Zoom meetings. So Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Corbin,
Yes.
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, item 12E 4.1, Finance Department City Budget Fiscal Year 2021 Mid-Year Amendments. Mr. Van Beek.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. Matt's getting some information loaded up here for Lynn McCammon to make her presentation to you. As we had outlined when you adopted the fiscal year budget for this year, we knew that it was the year of COVID already at that point. So we talked about being particularly mindful this year of periodically going through and giving at least quarterly updates to council of where things stand as we progress through this year. And Lynn has prepared and will do a great job of walking you through where we stand at this point. which obviously then does also include some mid-year budget amendments. So with that, Lynn, welcome.
Thank you and good evening. As Keith mentioned, this year is anything but typical. In a normal year, we traditionally prepare a mid-year budget amendment once we're halfway through the fiscal year. And the amendment usually includes items that would be unexpected when we were doing the budget, or maybe an instance where we had estimated something that we now have more accurate information. So while this year does include some of those, as we will see in a moment, I first kind of want to start with an overview of the COVID impact on the budget. Matt, if you don't mind advancing the slide. So when we initially started the year, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and we just were kind of cautious about what impact we would see from this. So we had identified early on some of the potential concerns we had, and one was property taxes, because we typically look back at what we saw in the last recession, and that in 2008 did impact real estate values. So we are happy right now that real estate market is holding. So right now we don't anticipate any impact on the current year budget, although we will be mindful of the potential impact to future budgets. But for now, to this budget, we are estimated zero impact with regards to property taxes. Then the next item, CARES Act grants. So some good news. We were able to work through, most of them were filtered through the state, but we identified several different grant opportunities and applied for them and submitted all the paperwork that we needed to. And to date, we actually have received over $900,000 in CARES Act funding. And that money can help offset any reductions in revenues, as well as cover any unexpected or unbudgeted expenses related to the COVID response. The next one we were concerned about is revenue sharing based on sales tax because of the closures around the country. Initially, we did see the sales tax dip after the March and April timeframe, but we are happy to see it has rebounded recently. And as we can see, even just when we look around, people are still spending money, which is a good thing because that's what the revenue sharing is based on. We did conservatively take that down by 170,000 based on the state's most recent estimates, but we're still hopeful. Then we of course looked at the investment earnings because we saw the Fed responded immediately with reducing the Fed fund rates to near zero. And what that does is all of our short-term money, it really impacted the interest we're able to earn on that. So we have taken it down by 30,000, which isn't all that much. But this is another item that's going to probably be impacted for the coming years because we do stagger our investment portfolio over a 5-year time range. So we have some that are still earning decent rates that once they mature, we will have to reinvest at those lower rates. Finally, we see the Civic Center. And of course, we all know that the Civic Center has really been impacted because of some of the closure mandates. So we were concerned, we reached out and worked with them, and they have provided their worst case scenario, which we've included here, which we're hopeful will not actually be the case. But you can see it's only $26,000 net decrease. And that really is because while they do need some additional funding, we were able to identify $200,000 worth of capital projects that have been budgeted that can be delayed into future years. So that leaves us with just a net impact of $26,000, which again, we're hoping is not even that much, but we want to be conservative. So really, as you can see, we are holding our own this year. And in fact, we ended fiscal year 20 really strong and we're able to both add additional contributions to the pension in June and transfer over additional funding to the capital fund. So we're still feeling cautiously optimistic about this year, but we are mindful that we will continue to monitor the situation because we know the pandemic hasn't ended and we know that there still could be potential impacts on future years. So we will continue to update you as we move forward in the process. But for now, I want to kind of move forward and show you what we are looking at for the mid-year budget amendment. So Matt, if you could move one more slide. So I just want to give the summary of the mid-year budget amendment. As you can see, we originally adopted the fiscal year budget with about $25.4 million of funding sources and uses, so for a balanced budget. And then if you look in the fiscal year 2021 amended column, you'll see that we have identified amendments that bring it up to 26.26 million for sources, and then uses 26 million. So we actually are proposing adding a little bit of funds to the reserve position. In the end, you can see the change is going to be about $200,000. And really, this allows us to keep our target of 20% fund balance ratio, which is great to have because it prepares us for times just like we are living in right now, so we can buffer against any unexpected situations that might arise. Now, I'll go on just to highlight a few of the bigger items that make up these changes. Matt, do you mind moving to the next page? On the revenue side, you can see here, the first one is the amendment included CARES Act grants funds of $731,000. You might have recalled, I just had mentioned we got over $900,000, and that is because actually just late last week after we had already made this amendment, we actually were notified we are going to get an additional amount from that one grant related to public safety payroll. So we already have a cushion of over $150,000 related to that, which will be included in the next amendment. On the state revenue sharing, this is the amount that I had talked about earlier for the reduced estimate of sales tax revenue sharing. And then the third one is the state personal property tax reimbursement. You'll see it's a little over 200,000, we're reducing it. And that's really just a matter of this being a source that we have to estimate. And our original estimate when we got our first distribution was just a little lower than we had estimated. So we're going to take that down to be conservative, although we still do get a distribution in May and we are hopeful. Next, you'll see permit revenues. We actually increased this budget because you may have noticed there's a lot of construction activity going. I think people are spending their money on home projects instead of travel. So we've seen permit revenues increase, and so we've added that. And then here's where we see the one side, only the one side of the Civic Center related impact. And the 200,000 represents bringing back in the funds that we had set aside for the capital projects. So those are the most significant. Of course, there's other smaller revenue items, but these are the large ones. Matt, if you don't mind moving to the expense. So on the expenditure and transfer side, the bulk of the amendment is related to personnel costs. And what that comes in is really through wages and differences in wages and pensions and insurance than we originally had estimated. And some of this we actually had a contingency set aside. So in fact, of the 400,000, the largest part really is related to a different in pension cost. Civic Center transfer, here's the other side of that. We do need additional 226,000 and some change related to funding needs because of the closures. So these represent some more of the significant adjustments. And like I said, we continue to keep monitoring as we move forward, and we're kicking off the budget process soon. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about what we've discussed tonight or anything that was in the packet.
Thank you, Lynn. Any questions from Councilor Lynn? Yes, go ahead, Scott.
Like some clarification. We're transferring $200,000 capital to the Civic Center, our operating budget. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. So it originally had been set aside for some capital projects, which are going to have to be delayed. And so since the money had transferred from the general fund over to the capital, it's coming back into the general fund for operating.
So the capital funds that we put there were to help improve the Civic Center so it can improve its marketability going forward. I guess I just want to make sure that's how I understood that capital funding was supposed to be spent. Is that correct? Matt, probably more toward Matt than anyone.
Yeah,
Sure,
Matt,
I can. I'd be happy to jump in on that, or actually Mayor Boxers was the liaison to the Civic Center Place Board that actually has gone through this as well. And yes, Scott, that was for light and rigging primarily. There was some additional carpet squares, things like that that were included in what that budget was for. We talked through that with the board, with the uncertainty of where we're at now and who knows where we're going to be even in 6 months. The board felt that that was a prudent process moving forward, given the year that, you know, the Civic Center has kind of been a yo-yo of regulations, as we all have. And they've been trying to do what they can. They had the smoke and tulip. They had all these, lots of different things, and it's just been a challenge. So yes, that was indeed for things that allow greater usability or marketability of that. But we think delaying that into the next fiscal year is a prudent move at this point. And that's me speaking for the board, but I'd love the mayor to chime in as well.
Scott, I'll echo exactly what Matt's saying. When COVID hit, the Civic Center Place Board said, hey, you know what, we need to be pretty conservative about what it is that we do moving forward. So they held off on those additional capital expenditures this year, not knowing what the future held, saying, hey, if things get better, if things open up and we've got the money to be able to do that, we'll do that. But when it got to the end of the year and they looked and said, hey, we've had a rough year this year. We think that we need to cover the losses that we've had at the Civic Center this year. And since that money was there, initially intended for capital improvement projects, their recommendation was, no, let's not use the money on it for that purpose. Let's make sure that we've got ourselves covered and we're budget neutral for this year. And then we'll look at the potential of those capital improvement projects at a later date as we come out of COVID. Because they're not even sure what the best use of that funds is going to be coming out of COVID at this point.
Right, but I want my clarification is that you're not going to be looking at your own budget for that additional 200,000 in the future. You're going to be coming back to this council for an additional $200,000 in the future for more capital projects that we already budgeted for, correct?
Well, yeah, I think you're exactly right with that, Scott. It is possible that the Civic Center Place Board is going to come back at some point and say, hey, we would like to do those things. But that's something that's a decision that's made in the future. They decided that it made sense to use that 200,000 since the expenditures were there for operations and they did not have revenue because of COVID. They felt that that was a good recommendation to make to council to do that budget amendment.
Yeah, and I just want to pile on one more quick thing, Scott, and Lynn said this, but I want to make sure that everybody heard it, is we asked them for the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario of you can't do any events in this for the rest of the fiscal year. And that's the number that we're working with. Since we actually went through that process, the governor's office or the Department of Health and Human Services actually is allowing them to do events of up to, I believe it's 100 now. So we're hopeful that this number actually, when we do the year-end budget amendments, is lower than what's proposed. But really, we're in such an uncertain position. It's very difficult to determine what that number actually is going to be. So we asked for the worst case, and that's what's being presented to you tonight.
Yeah, and to again, not to pile on, but to echo what Matt said, we made it very clear that we did not want Civic Center Place Board coming back to council to ask for another allocation during this fiscal year. So they said, put together what you see as the very worst case scenario. Our hope is that this is not, all of this money is not needed to cover operations. But as Matt said, it's uncertain. I didn't get the opportunity this afternoon to hear what the governor had to say, but it sounds like they may be able to start doing some additional things and opening up again. But as we've seen over the course of the last year, there's no real way to know exactly how long that's going to last and when that's going to change. And their phones have been ringing. They've been trying to be as creative as they possibly can to be able to get revenue dollars in there. But frankly, it's been very difficult for them to have those doors closed for essentially a year. Any other questions for Lynn?
If
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
not necessarily for Lynn, but I think I want to piggyback off of what Scott was talking about here. It seems to me, and I remember and I understand that we've been going through a very difficult year. Don't get me wrong, don't hear me wrong. But we also made it very clear that we were not going to continue to fund the Civic Center. That was said many, many times. And I think this last allocation was for the capital cost because it is our building and we need to help keep that up. The same thing I've been consistently saying with the post office and the Settlers House and the Capon House. So now somebody has taken what we said was going to be capital and using it for operational. Again, this has been a very unusual year. I understand that. But you just came back, both of you just came back and said they're going to be coming back for this money again. So we now are either looking at $600,000 or $800,000 as opposed to the $400,000 that we're talking about now. You see where the angst is?
Oh, completely. I share it with you, Mike. And if this were any other year, I think my top of my head would be coming off. But also remember, they haven't spent that money. They're making that recommendation. But those expenses are there. The building's expensive to run, whether it's open or whether it's not. And I got to give the Civic Center staff a whole lot of credit in trying to keep costs down as much as they possibly can. But all of us know that to have a building of that size, there are expenditures, whether the doors are open or whether the doors aren't. And they've done their best to be able to keep those costs down as much as possible and get revenue in the door. But this is a year that nobody anticipated. And frankly, they were gearing up just as COVID hit, they had an additional, 300 events planned for the calendar year of 2020, almost all of which were wiped off the map.
Okay, and again, Nathan, I understand that, and I'm trying to be as sympathetic. Chris has done a heck of a job keeping the doors open to the best he can, but I'm a little concerned about the precedent that we're setting here. They're allocating money that they really do not have the authority to allocate towards something other than capital. I understand and I appreciate the creativity, but I think they're playing with something there that they really don't have the authority to do.
And Mike, you're right, they don't. That's why it's a recommendation to us for us to make that decision. This is just the Civic Center Board's recommendation to council. Council has the ability to say, no, we don't want to do that. We're not going to vote for that, and then we've got to figure out something else to do.
But either way, what it boils down to, either way, is the city is going to have to make up the difference because of the extenuating circumstances.
I think that that's an accurate representation, yes.
Okay. I've said my piece. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lynn.
So what happens if we say no?
You want to take that one, Matt? That's a really good accounting and legal question, in my mind, anyway.
Yeah, or I can weigh in too, Matt. But
Feel free.
So maybe just kind of approaching this from a different angle. There's a couple things that you could do that I know that the Civic Center Place Board has talked about. That Matt, being the staff member assigned to that, has certainly had conversations with me about. On one hand, I'd probably like to maybe slightly rephrase. I think council has had many conversations, and while there's a hope to get to a no subsidization position, at least more recently, we've talked about, well, we're at this level of subsidization and don't come back and ask for more in the middle of the year like what we've had. So that's slightly different, right? I think what we're in the position in right now is like every other business, in particular in the type of business that the Civic Center is in, no one's making money and everyone's losing money. So the choices that you have, I suppose in one hand, you could say, and I'm not sure I hear this, but you could say, no, we don't want you to take that capital money out. We actually want you to proceed with spending that capital money also, which would change the net position that Lynn's presented to you. And I don't think the Civic Center Place Board is making that recommendation. And I don't think Matt or I would make that recommendation either, because of the amount of uncertainty there, that we're just not sure that we'd want to invest that money right now. On the other hand, if you'd say, hey, we don't want to cover that, really you're then very quickly making a gigantic long-term decision, which is basically breaking the contract with VenueWorks and basically saying we don't have anyone running that operation. And I think we've had the discussion where that continues to be something that the Civic Center Place Board has been tasked with monitoring over time. But I don't think that the year that we're in right now is the place to do that evaluation and make that decision. So Lynn, that's how I would respond to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Lynn, the Civic Center Place Board did have exactly that discussion.
Mhm.
What if we shut it down completely? And I think, especially with the timing of where we're at, that would be a little bit short-sighted. And I want to make sure that people understand that the Civic Center has not been without pain. The staff over there have not been without pain in this. They have any part-time staff members that they had who've been laid off for months now. They've furloughed at least one of the few full-time people they had left. And the remaining folks over there took a 20% pay cut until they have the building back open. So they are taking this very seriously as well. I put that out there for your information. I see the mayor's nodding his head, but they have not been without pain in this also.
Scott?
I guess the question would be to Lynn and or to Keith. What's the likelihood of doing a budget amendment that's half that? Or even separating this budget amendment into two separate amendments so we could vote on it independently? It's on, I mean, this budget amendment that for transfer, we're going to do all of it. And so is there a way to split that out, or is there a way to do a transfer of a certain amount of that capital over and not the entire amount?
I guess just to weigh in before maybe legal or otherwise answers that, Scott, I think it'd be helpful to understand and maybe have council have a discussion instead of voting on a motion. Like what is your intent, or what would you be trying to accomplish by splitting those out? It would be my question, just so I would be clear if anyone's making a motion or voting on something, what the intent of the motion would achieve.
So this is a budget adjustment, correct? Transfer? Is that this has to have our approval, correct?
Right, and I'm not challenging that. I'm just making sure that if there is a motion to make an amendment, that everyone understands what you would like staff to do in making that motion.
I guess I have been very vocal. I know that, and I understand the circumstances probably far greater than anyone on the board here. Well, I wouldn't say that equally, I guess, but it's important to know I have said in the past, I'm not spending another dollar on this Civic Center, and now we're going to we're transferring capital over that we agreed to put there to help facilitate the building to be more successful. And now we're putting into operating, and we're going to, I know people are going to, the Civic Board is going to come back again for another $200,000 for that capital in order to do this. I mean, it was an emphasis on that, the Civic Center Board was an emphasis on having this money to be successful. So I know they're going to have to come back again. I just worry that we're going to be putting another $250,000 in this building next year. And I don't know, I'm not too sure I support the fact that we're going to transfer that money over. And if we did transfer any of it over, why do we have to transfer the entire amount over? Why can't we transfer a portion of that money and watch and see how things work out over the next 3 or 4 months?
And Scott, I think I know where you're going with that. All of these expenditures have not been, this is an estimate of what they're looking at through the end of the fiscal year. Am I correct on that, Matt? That's my recollection on it.
Right.
So not as if the Civic Center board or the Civic Center or Venue Works has spent this money and they're saying we need to get reimbursed for this money. Matt and I said to the Civic Center Place board, come up with what you think the worst case scenario is for the Civic Center over the course of the rest of this fiscal year, because we don't want to have to come back to council a second time because the first amount was not enough. So I think I see where you're saying with that is, do they really need all of this money? And I think the best answer to that question is, we don't know yet. As things open up, when things open up, what they're able to do depending on what the restrictions are and how long restrictions are in place, those are all question marks. So I think what Chris and his team did is put together numbers that said, if we're not able to do anything at all, worst case scenario, this is what we're looking at. Now, I don't know if that answers your question from a procedural standpoint of, okay, what do they need today and can they come back later? What you're asking for is exactly what we asked the Civic Center Place not to do. Was we said, give council one number so that we don't have to revisit this again later in the year. Now, I think that the understanding is if Civic Center Place does not need all of this money for operations this year as a subsidy, they're not just going to keep that money and spend it. That was my understanding, was that this is a reserve fund for them to be able to use in worst case scenario. If it's not needed, it's not spent.
Well, and Matt, you can describe even the process, like it's not their money. They have to submit a whole billing process and everything that Matt reviews and all those types of things. So it's city money that's reserved and kept for us and would only be paid out as it relates to a process. Am I correct there, Matt?
Correct.
Yeah, Mike.
I'll put some flashing lights or something up there next time.
You were leaned back there. My apologies.
Lynn, can we put a restricted fund here? Is that legal?
Want to add a restricted fund?
No, just make this a restricted fund. I understand what Keith just said about that they have to come through to get the expenditures. My point being is, and I think I know where Scott's going with this, and I'm kind of there myself just a little bit, in that we're going to have to, if they do not use this money, what happens to the balance they don't use? Do we have to have another budget amendment to come back and put it back into the capital? Or if we just put it there as a restricted that said, okay, you go through the process of the $200,000, you need $75,000. What you're asking us to do now, right now, is you're asking us to throw this back in the general fund so that all that 200,000 or 226,000, whatever amount is decided on, is there. And then we're going to have to transfer it back.
Right. So a couple things on that. So first of all, approving the budget amendment would only really give the authorization. So you're right. The money wouldn't necessarily have to make the transfer because we're just authorizing that occurs. So when you do the accounting thing, you've got the authority to do that. So then Matt, of course, has to approve the bills to be expended, and then it would hit the expense side and we could transfer at the same time so we don't actually bring it in. So that could alleviate the need to go back and forth. However, at the end of the year, we always do, we have only the year I've been here, right? Only 1 year. So I did see that we did transfer the excess over to the capital fund, but you could have it so that if you wanted to add, I guess, an asterisk to it, that you would only make the transfer would coincide with the expense incurred. That's how we could do the accounting. So in fact, no extra money is just sitting there. And I'm not sure I answered your question totally, but again, it's not like the whole 226 would go over there. Only the amount that is actually submitted for reimbursement and approved for payment would go to the Civic Center, and then we could just bring the money in from the capital to coincide with that. Sorry, Keith.
And I've been around long enough. I've heard enough of these amendments and things like that. So I appreciate your better explanation on that. But as it reads right now, expenditures and transfers, a layman's going to look at this and they're going to say 226,000 is going over there.
It's
just because it's a transfer. All right. So if we keep it as you just explained, that it is there in reserve, not actually being transferred back to the general fund until absolutely needed, but you have the authorization going through the proper channels to pay the bill. Keith, you're looking a little perplexed with me. I'm trying, but I feel a little bit better now with your explanation.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think what happens is at the end, it's like every budget that we have. So you fast forward to the end and we're closing the fiscal year, right? You have the ultimate of all final when we close and we're moving all the funds around because we didn't spend every last penny in the budgets. And this is a very untechnical term that Lynn will shake her head about too. We sweep all of those funds, right? No, we don't sweep the fund, but I think that communicates. So we could do a lot of things and say, boy, well, let's treat it like restricted and all those types of things. And I'm not sure that in the end, Mike, that technically changes the accounting. But I think we very clearly understand, and quite frankly, and I fully agree. I have no interest in having any further transfer to the Civic Center or to subsidize their operations in this difficult year any more than what we need to. And I think that's crystal clear. But again, you have the ability to pull out or amend or do different things with the recommended budget amendments that's been presented. So we'll definitely do what we can to meet council's will.
Mike, for clarification, the way I understood it is this funds would be treated the same way that we treat the subsidy that we do for the Civic Center now. It's sitting there, the money's there allocated for the Civic Center, but it does not get transferred over until there's an invoice that comes from the Civic Center that Matt approves. And so my understanding was these funds would essentially be added to those funds in kind of that same pool. You know, not necessarily sitting in a bag behind Matt's desk there that he pulls out, but that's the way I always, you know, in my simple-mindedness, always picture it, that there's a pool of money there that we've allocated for the Civic Center, but that doesn't Matt doesn't drag that whole bag over to the Civic Center at once. It's when they present an invoice for expenditures that have to be approved. So there is kind of a restricted process already. These funds would just be added to that.
I'm fully aware of that.
Okay.
But we're not comparing apples to apples here. We're comparing apples to oranges because this fund was for capital, not general. That's where the crux comes in. Mm-hmm. I fully understand that, yes, until there's a bill submitted that they don't get paid, things like that. And and this is another fund, this is another term that Lynn's going to really love, the slush fund. That's where that money comes out of. But where I'm having the angst is this is capital. This money was set for by capital. And now we're taking that capital money because of the horrid year that we're having and turning it into operational money. That's where I'm having the problem with. And all of a sudden, our $200,000, because we bailed out, and I'm sorry for that terminology, I just don't know what else to use right now. We bailed that out. Now we're going to have another $200,000 another couple of years to do the lighting and suspension and everything that this money was suggested for. Again, I can't say it enough. I appreciate the staff and the committee trying to get as creative as possible and understanding that the fact that they weren't open and trying to do what they can. I am not being sympathetic to that. But I also heard council very, very, very plainly, and so did Chris, and so did everybody else that was there, and you were in the room at the time, saying this was going to stop. Now, I'm willing, because of the year that we went through, I'm willing to give a little grace. But I'm also going to be very willing to let it be known again, exactly what I said well over a year ago, when they came to us for the adjustments. This was for capital. Extenuating circumstances. It has to be known, and that's where I was going with my restricted, Keith and Lynn. Whatever's not being used has to stay in the capital side. It can't be said, okay, well, council said this can go over there, so now we have 226,000. Yeah, we got bills submitted and so on and so forth. I want it to be fully understood that whatever money is not absolutely needed stays in that capital side. That was my point.
I agree.
Can that be handled, staff, from an accounting perspective?
From an accounting perspective, absolutely, we can do that. So I would ask the attorney if you need to add anything to the motion as it's approved to, or if it's just fine to handle it through the accounting.
Yeah, Ron?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the motion, well, there's no motion pending on the floor right now, correct?
No.
Correct.
It's a recommendation. So there need to be a motion to approve the recommendation, and then a motion to amend that recommendation to eliminate, and I don't have it on the screen in front of me, but the capital transfer item, the $200,000, to eliminate that from the budget adjustments and transfers. That would leave the $226,000 amount in there still. If you wanted to adjust that, you could. I would add that the agreement with VenueWorks is simply that if there's a deficiency in the operating account each month, that the city is to deposit an amount to cover that deficiency. And if the amount it turns out there isn't a deficiency after that month's over with, if you deposited too much in effect, then that excess would be credited against future payments. So there is an obligation to pay for a deficiency. Of course, they have to stay within their budget, but that's how you would accomplish the change in the recommendation. A motion to adopt, and then a motion to amend the proposal to eliminate the $200,000 capital transfer.
Mike, do you understand that enough to make the motion in the amendment?
I do.
All right. Any other questions for staff? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
So the original motion is to adopt, approve, crying out loud. Adopt the I can't talk today, appropriations adjustments from the respective accounts to be approved, and that the finance director be authorized to make the necessary transfers in the fiscal year 2021 budget.
Okay,
that is the motion as it stands.
All right, so we have a motion from Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Aarons-Horst. Any discussion or amendments to the motion?
Very quick.
Yes, Mr. Corbin.
Yeah, so very quickly, to understand, through this amendment, we're still authorizing the ability for the Civic Center to use the $226,096 going forward. We're still authorizing that, correct? We're just separating it out. Is that what I'm?
That's my understanding. Mike, is that your
is-
understanding as well as the motion and then the intent of the amendment?
Well, the amendment hasn't been made yet, so we have no intent. The original in motion was as presented the way it was. Now, before your question, Scott, the amendment was going to be that the $226,000 stays on the capital side. If I understood Ron correctly. Did I understand you correctly, Ron?
Yeah, Ron?
Yeah, but I think it's 200,000. The 226 is an expenditure for operating purposes, but it'd be the $200,000 adjustment. I think I've got that number right. Again, I don't have that right in front of me. Just a second.
Was that the previous page, Lynn or Matt?
Yes.
Right. So just to, if I might add, so what I'm understanding is, so we're going to leave the 226 to be able to cover the shortfalls, but if you're taking out the 200,000 transfer from the capital, we could just handle this when we get to May and do our final budget adjustment and see where the number comes in, and then make that adjustment at that time. Is that what you're thinking, Ron?
Well, you know, right now as it stands, the motion is to approve the proposed transfers. The motion to amend that we've discussed, but hasn't been made yet, would take out that capital, that it would, I shouldn't say take out, it would leave in the budget the $200,000 capital amount. But it would still leave a transfer to increase the operating expenses by the 226.
And just to clarify, and I think I have this right, but Lynn, I'm happily corrected when wrong. When you go to your action request that outlines that the general fund revenues will increase by $799,525, then the proposed, well, the motion that may or may not be made but has been discussed, we wouldn't be transferring money back from the capital into the general fund. So that general fund revenue would increase not by $799, it would increase by $599. And then the net added general fund reserve position would not go up by $367, it would go up by $167. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Dave, you had your hand up there at one point. Mr. Hoekstra?
Yeah, some of my questions have been answered, but I was just looking for a clarification of what the motion on the table at the moment was, but I think I understand that now.
Yeah, and I'll say it to you anyway. The motion on the table right now is to approve the recommendation that was given by staff in regard to the budget amendments.
Right.
Okay. Lynn, did you have something?
Nope, my bad. I had to plug in all my cords, so sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. Just thought I saw you wave there a minute. I'm trying to look at a big Brady Bunch screen here and keep my eye on it at the same time. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Yes, Mr. Corbin.
Apologies. I know it's quite difficult as we're doing it this way, but so in order to ensure that 200,000 is only being used based or per the contract that we have run, we would have to make a separate amendment or amendment to this motion to ensure that happens, or that will automatically draw. I guess I want to ensure that that amendment we've been talking about here to this money, that the money is set aside and it can only be drawn upon when necessary. Contract.
Sorry. Yeah, the motion to amend would leave the $200,000 in the capital account for the Civic Center.
Okay, so I'd like to make an amendment or a motion to amend the current motion only to permit $200,000 intended for the capital to be used for operational expenses as necessary by the Civic Center Board to meet obligations to our contract. Would that be an appropriate statement?
Instead of the one we have now?
Well, it would be an amendment to make that money was set aside.
Yeah, Ron, because I think the question was on, does that accomplish what Mr. Corbin is intending?
Yeah, I think the motion probably is a little bit too long. I think the motion should be motion to amend to leave the $200,000 in the capital account for the Civic Center.
Motion to amend to leave the $200,000 in the capital project account for the Civic Center.
And I will support that amendment.
Amended by Corbin, supported by Trethewey. Is there any discussion on the amendments to the original motion? Yes, Mr. Hoekstra.
All right, then just to clarify what Mr. Van Beek expressed earlier, in this scenario, then the $200,000, which was intended for capital, remains intended for capital, but the whatever shortfall there is coming out of the general fund, correct?
Correct.
That's the motion. That's the amended motion on the floor at the moment.
Yeah, so
Yeah, hold on. Go ahead.
so essentially they're getting what they need, what they're asking for. It's just coming out of a different account. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, Mr. Van Beek.
Only because I'm trying to help clarify and understand the conversation. I'm not passing judgment, okay? I have a sense that some people are wanting to possibly not give the Civic Center as much money, and yet the motion that's on the table actually gives them the 266 that they were asking for, if that's the number. And it additionally says, hey, go ahead and have the 200,000 for capital and reserve in addition to the 266.
That's my understanding as well.
So
That's twice as.
not advocating at this point. I'm just saying that's what the motion says, that the 266 is there to cover the, as Matt outlined, the worst case scenario of what they think could be. And that exists again because there's no revenue coming in. So they don't have a revenue source. So no matter what happens there, that building costs us money every day. And even though they don't have, nearly the staff they've ever had before, obviously, and they've taken cuts, and they've gotten earlier in the year some of those PPP loans and those types of things that have filled that, there's no revenue coming into the Civic Center. So the 266 in the motion right there, as it's before you right now, it covers that worst case scenario to get us through the end of the year. And then the amendment that you made said, hey, we don't want to use the capital to help plug that. We want them to still have that capital. So if that's what you want to have happen, great. I'm just trying to clarify. I think that's the motion that's on the table right now, if that's what you want to accomplish.
I don't think we want that.
I don't think that's, if I might.
Go ahead, Mr. Trethewey.
How did we swing from 400,000, over 400,000 to 200,000 here, 200,000 there? Now you've got me totally lost. And I'm the guy that sits on the audit committee. I'm sorry, it just doesn't make any sense. We had allocated over $400,000 to them for this budget year, correct? For capital, correct? In the 21? What did we give them for capital then in 21?
Go ahead, Matt.
Just to be clear, we don't actually give them anything for capital.
What did we have? What was their subsidy this year?
So their subsidy or their allocation for capital, Mike?
Both.
So
how much money did we give?
Subsidy was about 450,000, if I remember correctly. Lynn's probably going to be able to come up with that number a little bit better. And then we had the $200,000 was in the municipal capital improvement fund. So we budgeted 400 and some in the City of Holland Civic Center Place budget. And we budgeted between the lighting and the rigging and all the other little things, we put a little bit of money aside for maintenance over there too, but that was over $200,000.
So the initial budget had 404,000 for the venue works subsidy, Civic Center venue works subsidy.
Did we answer your question, Mike?
So we're being asked to subsidize an additional 266,000 over the 400,000 we've already allocated. Am I 100% there?
266 or 226?
226.
Or I'm sorry, 226. That the numbers are away from me. So being an old man, I forget them very quickly. Sorry.
So the worst case scenario for the operations of the Civic Center to Venue Works is an additional $226,000.
And that's the amount that we said originally, this is the last time. It's a COVID year.
No, this is $226,000 more than what we said would be the last time. And then
Yeah.
there's an additional $200,000 there. So, wow.
I'm going to disagree with that statement, Mike and Nikki. When we put the budget together, we knew that there would be a need for an operational subsidy for the Civic Center for multiple years to help it get off the ground. There has never been a realistic belief that the Civic Center would be self-supporting, and it may at some point way down the line, but we have been told time and time again that at this stage of a new facility, it will not be self-supporting. And so the city needs to provide a subsidy. In the first year of operations, they had expenditures that exceeded the subsidy. So they came back to the city council and asked for an additional allocation. They then came back a second time in that first year and asked for an additional allocation. And that's when city council said, we don't want to do additional allocations anymore. Get the budget numbers straight. And so for this fiscal year that we're dealing with right now, the Civic Center came up with a budget that asked for Lynn, I think you said $404,000 or $405,000 subsidy allocation from the city, correct? That's roughly what the number is.
Right.
Right. So they said, we need, in order to be able to run this facility, we need $400,000 from the city. That's the subsidy that we need. They also said, hey, we think that it would be advantageous and that there would be some return on investment if we made additional capital improvements to the Civic Center, and we would like $200,000 to make those capital improvements. This year, during 2020, there was not almost no income coming in. And so what the Civic Center is saying is, we can't make it on the $404,000 subsidy. And so when the Civic Center Place Board met, Matt and I pressed them and said, tell the city council what your worst case scenario is if no other revenue comes in during this fiscal year. What's your worst case scenario? And they said, we see that worst case scenario as $226,000 over the additional 404. And when we started then looking and saying, where can that money come from? We said, you know what, there's $200,000 that was going to be used for capital improvements on the building. We didn't spend that money. Civic Center did not spend that money on capital improvements to it because things were closed. And so the recommendation from the Civic Center board is, hey, take that $200,000 that was going to be used for capital improvements, and let's use that to cover the shortfall for fiscal year 2021.
Along with another $26,000 on top of that.
Another $26,000 on top of that. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to I'm sorry to cut you off, Nathan.
No,
we've done probably 45 minutes here too long on this. So I'm going to go back to my original statement. Now that I understand a little bit better, it was very confusing. I'm going to go with my original statement saying that the unused portion of that $226,000 stays in the capital. Okay. If they need 75,000 of that 226, your worst case scenario, right? They only need 75,000. So that gives them a balance then of $125,000 for capital in the future. I want that very understood and as part of this motion. That's the whole thing that I was trying to get to. Thank you for the clarification.
I've got a recommendation before you go, Scott. I got a recommendation because I'm planning on voting no on Scott's amendment because I don't want to allocate the 226 and keep the $200,000 in the capital improvement fund. The way things work with that contract and the way that we do budgeting now is my understanding of it anyway is in any year, if there's money left over in that subsidy, if the Civic Center had not needed the full $404,000 in 21 because 21 was a really good year, that money would have been retained in the budget. And at the end of the budget year, we could have, as a council, said, we want to take that money that's left over and we want to apply that to capital. My thinking on this is that's exactly what we should be doing here, is that we say, you know what, we're going to move that $200,000 over into a place where for staff's purposes, they don't have to juggle it between accounts. It's sitting in that same account where the 404 was. And if there's money left over at the end of the year, if they don't need to use that full 226 additional that we've allocated, Matt's going to tell us that. And then at that point, we can say, let's take whatever's left of that and let's put it back toward capital improvement at the Civic Center. I think that's the simple way to solve all of this stuff. We've got all the same controls in place. Yeah, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that's exactly what my motion was saying, look, let's leave it in the capital project fund, okay? Let's leave that money there, but allow them to draw from that. And of course, what the balance is left is the balance, right? That's what they use for capital projects going forward. But they're entitled to use or draw from that account when we have contract obligations to meet to pay for operational expenses. That was my motion. And then with ideally, Ron, he didn't understand that part, but that's exactly what I was placing that motion. So I'll be glad to withdraw my amendment and I'll make another amendment to such, but I do not want to allocate an additional $200,000 into an operational budget. If they want to draw from what they're currently provided to them, I'm okay with that. Draw from your current capital project, but understand you're not going to get another $200,000 for next year or the following year for capital projects. You're just not, at least not from me. So, I mean, if you want to draw on that, that's fine, but that's what my motion was intended to do.
Dave?
Ron can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's possible for us to take funds from like a capital improvement fund and use it for operations. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think I didn't misunderstand Councilman Corbin's motion or intent there with that motion. But yes, you're right. I think the transfer, I think Mike's really said it best. The transfers happen the way they're proposed, and whatever of that 226 is not used then can be put into the capital fund, transferred into the capital account. Would that be the right accounting, Lynn, for it?
It's just really confusing, and I apologize for the confusion. But yeah, it's right. So it has to do. The money came from the general fund originally, so it was operating into the capital. So that's why it wasn't restricted capital by an external thing. It was a transfer, and so that fund, those monies can ultimately be used for that operational part, the deficit, if you so decide to make that, to include that funding. So is that the question? Because you're right. Certain items that are restricted for capital can only be spent for capital, but in this case, it is different because it came from the general fund operating in the first place. So that is the accounting treatment of it. Sorry, Keith.
Yeah, Keith.
No, that's fine. I was just going to really shortly and directly answer Dave's question. Correct, Dave. We don't pay operating costs out of the capital fund.
Right.
You got to have it in the right bucket before you can pour it out.
Exactly.
Right.
Now,
Right.
What Mike and Scott are saying is we all hope that we don't have to use that 226 for operating purposes as we move forward. And at least for right now, and this can be revisited and you can, and I don't know how you're all gonna vote on this, but at least for now, we understand, and I think the mayor and Matt can communicate that on. Now, I don't know how much control they have over getting or not getting revenue, but anything that's not used out of that 226, what we'd probably say, and Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, is we'd say, okay, we don't use it. And then when we do budget amendments later on in the year, anything of the 226 that we don't use, we transfer that up to a maximum of 200,000 back into the capital account for the Civic Center.
I think that meets the ends that you want, doesn't it, Scott?
Yeah, but we can't leave it in the capital fund and pay operational costs out of the capital.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Mayor Box. So I'll remove or withdraw my amended motion so that we can appropriately give the amendment that is necessary to make sure that what Keith or what Mr. Van Beek has mentioned can happen.
Okay, and so you are asking to withdraw your motion, Mr. Tathui. I believe you were the one that seconded that. Are you in agreement with that as well?
I think we need to talk another 45 minutes on this, so maybe not. No, I withdraw also.
So can staff assist me or our attorney assist me in what the motion would be so we can appropriately write this so that we're allowing them to use the 200,000, but that whatever the balance is what they're going to have left over for capital projects going forward. We're not allocating another $200,000 out of any general fund or any other fund going forward. At least that's the motion I'd like to make.
Here's my recommendation, Scott, is that we don't even amend the motion. That we say allocate that money over to allocate the money over so it can be used for operations. If there's money left at the end of the year, we're going to have to do some budget cleanup with that at the end of the year anyway. Let's decide at the end of the year what happens with that, whatever the overage is. Why I don't see a need to make a decision about that at this point, because Civic Center Board can't do anything with that money other than use it for operations as approved under the budget. We've still got control over that money. Why lock ourselves into a decision? Maybe at the end of the year we decide we don't want to use that money for capital improvement at the Civic Center because circumstances have changed. Gives us freedom. That's just my 2 cents on it. That if we keep the motion as it's currently in place, we are still in the driver's seat with the money that's left over, and we can decide at the end of the year what we want to do.
With the original motion.
That's the original motion.
No.
Yeah. Lynn, did you?
No, I'm good.
No, you're good.
The bottom line is it's a 200,000 plus another 10% is roughly what it's coming out to with 226. 10, 11% or whatever.
That's the amount that that Chris and the Civic Center Board said they see as their worst case scenario for the rest of the year.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
and if
Matt
there's money
will
left
be
over at the end of the year,
Matt will oversee that.
we have control over how that money's spent. We can put it back into general fund. We can move it over to municipal capital improvement fund. We can decide that it's going to go to the Civic Center or it's going to do enhancements to the dog park or whatever we want to do with it. We can make that decision at the end of the year. Yeah, Keith.
And maybe even to be more clear as it relates to the capital. Up until this point, there was 200,000 available in capital. And if they work through a process and we bid something out and Matt said, hey, we're allocated to spend up until 200,000 on capital, we could have proceeded with that. The recommended staff motion and what's on the table right now, they can't do that anymore because there's not money there to allocate to do the capital. So no capital would happen moving forward until and unless you would authorize an amount in a future action to put money in the capital to do that. Now you've indicated that, hey, as we get to the end of the year and you save money on the operational, then that'd be the money that we'd use to backfill that 200,000. But if that helps, that's kind of where we're at right now, I think, with the recommended motion and what's on the table.
Yeah, and I would expect at the end of the year that staff would make a recommendation to us to remind us that we had this conversation. And at the end of the year, say, remember in January when you talked about this, there's $75,000 left in that fund or whatever. We're recommending that move over into a capital improvement budget for the Civic Center.
Be guaranteed I'll be looking at the minutes from this. So Kathy, have your pencil sharp.
You can get it on video. Watch it anytime you want. Mike.
Oh yeah. No,
So we're back to the original motion, Mr. Hoekstra.
That's just what I wanted to clarify. We're back to the original staff's recommendation, which has been moved and supported, correct?
Yes. Any discussion?
Okay.
Any further discussion? I'm looking for hands waving. Seeing none, Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Trethewey,
oh crap. Start with me. Yes.
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Corbin,
Yes.
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. That's what I call civil discourse and working together. Thank you. Thank you everyone for that. Okay, I have in all of that gotten behind on my agenda. I believe the next item is item 6.1 gifts.
Yes.
Kathy, would you please review the gifts for us?
The city manager's office is pleased to report the following gifts. Park and Recreation, Oz Project. Holland CVB on behalf of Luger's family, $500. Parks and Recreation, Van Raalte Dog Park. Amber Letchaw, John A. Vandenbosch Company, $700. Parks and Recreation, Sal Perez Scholarship Program. Employee donations, July through December 2020, $167. Parks and Recreation, Ice Rink Program, Frank Cry, $25,000. Public Safety Services, K-9 Program, Ferris, Busher, and Zweers PC in memory of Captain Bud Bohr, $50. Lucy Larson, $37.50. Charlotte and Sloten, $50. Merlin and Linda Briner, $50. Jean and Luann Dykens, $50. Public Safety Services Honor Guard Program, Lucy Larson, $37.50. Downtown Group, Windmill Island Gardens, donations July 1 through December 31, 2020, $800.43. It is recommended that these donations be accepted with appreciation, credited to the appropriate account, and an expression of gratitude be forwarded to said donors.
Thank you, Kathy. What is the pleasure of council?
Motion to accept with appreciation.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Garcia. Thanks, Raul, for throwing the hand up there. Any discussion? I simply cannot let it pass by without comment. We definitely appreciate all of the gifts that we get. But when I see an additional $25,000 toward an ice rink by Frank Cry, this is something that has been near and dear to his heart for years. There are multiple donations. I don't know what the total amount that Frank has donated. I don't know if, Matt, do you know that number that we're up to with Frank toward the ice rink?
It's well over $100,000 at this point.
So
absolutely amazing to me.
One incredible member of our community donated over $100,000 toward an ice rink. I think deserves extra recognition. We want to thank Frank for that. We want to thank his dedication and service to the community, and definitely this gift as well.
Let's build one.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's a very good idea. Any other discussion? And Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Corbin,
Yes.
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item 6.2, Management Administrative Services, Human Resources, Community and Neighborhood Services Department, Sustainability Manager, Mr. Van Beek.
I'm going to hand this off relatively quick to Jen, and I think Mark is still out there. I think they'll outline the why behind this and the opportunity that it creates. I think it's just a wise moving forward on taking advantage of the opportunity. So Jen, Mark, I'm not sure who's going first. I think Jen's handling it all.
Yep, I'll go ahead and take the lead on this one. So you both probably, or all probably heard that both Aaron Thalenwood and Ken Freestone have both accepted positions outside of the city organization. So Aaron's position, the solid waste and recycling coordinator, that was budgeted at 24 hours a week. The rest of his duties were all airport duties, which he is taking with him. And then Ken Freestone, Technical Assistant 3 for the Home Energy Retrofit Program, was budgeted at 28 hours a week. There was some fluctuation, especially this past year, but that's what was budgeted. So like he said, we have an opportunity anytime folks leave or retire. We're sad to see them leave. They're both leaving on great terms, but we have an opportunity to look at the positions and kind of evaluate what the needs are currently. So at this point, we feel that combining these two positions, two part-time positions, into one full-time sustainability manager position at 40 hours a week would give us an advantage in recruiting a highly qualified individual to fill and excel in the role, and would help us with retention. So making it a full-time position would give this person, whoever's hired for the position, benefits, retirement, health benefits. And so it's a much more desirable position for a qualified sustainability manager to apply for. So this position would be classified as a CPC with an annual salary range of $61,567 to $73,798. I have confirmed, and there aren't a lot of these positions available, but there are a couple here in our area, and we're right in line with what we're hoping to offer for that position. This position would be funded, it'd be a 50-50 split. So it would be half general fund, and then the other half would be funded by the solid waste and recycling fund, which has enough funds to provide for that type of salary. Mark, do you want to chime in at all?
Yeah, I guess the only additional thing I would say is that the net effect on the cost for this would be, what do we come up with, Jen? I think is just $10,000 additional would be the bottom line to go with a full-time employee. And we really, all the positive aspects of being able to get a full-time person with retention and being able to have somebody here full-time, we think that it's well worth it to do that. So
definitely. And 10,000 is kind of the worst case scenario because when we do our assumptions, and you can look at the cost sheet, it's attached to the report, we look at kind of the middle of that range. So we go to the C step. Most people are hired at A, maybe B. And then we also assume that this person would take family coverage for their benefits. And so we're not sure what the actual cost for the position would be, but if it were a C step and they had full benefits for them and their family, it would be about a $10,000 hit to the budget, which isn't much.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Nikki, and then Mike.
Okay, are you looking for someone outside the department, outside of City Hall for this? It doesn't have to be internal.
Correct. We will post it externally. Definitely internal candidates are always encouraged to apply, but yes, it will be posted externally.
Okay, yeah, I'm excited. I think this is a logical extension of what the two positions are. And I think the recycling and the first coordinators, that sustainability is well established, and it'll be need for maintenance and ongoing. And the retrofit will be I think that needs updating, and certainly we're with the strategic development team. Oops, there you are. My screen changed. I think that'll be something to really work on, And now that Lynn's involved, it'll be a whole new, I'm excited for that reconfiguration.
Thank you. Mike?
Nikki stole some of my thunder, but thank you very much because
sorry.
I work with both of these gentlemen on the materials management team. Known Ken for an awful long time, and when I first heard about this, my concern was that we were going to lose the passion of these two gentlemen, thus compromising the program. What I'm seeing here is a step in the right direction, just like Nikki said, in that it's not going to be compromised. It's not going to go by the wayside. In fact, it's going to get enhanced. We've got a great baseline right now with the recycling carts coming up. That's been laid out very well. A couple of people, I know Jay's been through it already. I've gone through the retrofit program just recently. A couple other council members have. So this is definitely in line with our goals of sustainability. This couldn't be any better suited. This is the poster child for our goals. So kudos. I hope we find the right person. Those are two pairs of shoes that are going to be hard to fill. But I'm looking forward to working with the new person and continuing on with the positive progress that we have. So good luck to both of you. You're going to need it.
And Lynn, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to echo too all the great work that Aaron and Ken have done. I've learned so much from both of them, and Peter Bogart before Ken just have really done an amazing job in creating a sustainability program at the city that's really remarkable. And I think the amount of responsibilities in the job description really speaks to the amount of work that's being done by the people at the city. So I think that's really great. What I'm hoping is, and I think echoing what Mike said, step in the right direction, hoping that at some point this can be elevated, like Esther was elevated to a director level. It feels like this, is a first step towards being able to move somebody to a director level who can really drive and create a comprehensive plan that's, all throughout the city to support the work that's being done. And I also noticed that there isn't a role for the community energy plan. And I didn't notice that in the job description. Will the person have any role in the strategic development team going forward?
I'm going to turn it over to Keith first, and then if Mark needs to do follow-up, we can do that too.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. I will remind, right now, we've written this job description where it continues to report to Mark. I would remind council, though, that only because of COVID and everything, the assistant city manager position that we added in the budget last year was part economic development and part sustainability. And because we haven't gone ahead and fully filled that position with a full-time person yet, kind of answering both of your comments or your questions there, Lynn, eventually I see this as a very high-level person that when we get that assistant city manager position in, would work very closely and would report to that assistant city manager position, that then has that higher level of economic development and sustainability is the two things that are responsible for. And then this higher level, while not a department head position, a higher level manager position, really then would, bring some strength big time to that team from where we are now.
Sounds great.
So I think that maybe answers kind of both of your questions and gives you an idea on the strategy and the direction that we're moving here.
Lynn, if I could just real quickly say too, so this person is going to have to be really truly unique. We got a lot of responsibilities in here, but one of them is to be involved with the CEP, and that we see this person really kind of overseeing the whole educational plan in the outreach
Mhm.
for the educational aspects of the CEP. So the tactical team, the educational tactical team is working on an education plan right now that could be, well, we hope would become effective January 1st next year. And it would be that this person would be the point person in implementing the educational aspects of the CEP. So would be really kind of very integral in the CEP process itself, but mainly on the education.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion in regard to this item.
Motion to adopt the recommendation of the new full-time sustainability manager position to the third floor.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Ehrenhorst. Any discussion? Seeing none. Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Corbin,
Yes.
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item, 12E 6.3, Management and Administrative Services, Human Resources, extension of the emergency paid sick leave and expanded FMLA until March 31, 2021. Mr. Van Beek.
Yeah, real quickly, because Jen again will take lead on this and does a great job. This is something that we kind of knew as a possibility that was coming. Nothing happened before the end of the year. And ultimately, while I had a lot of thoughts about this, I definitely recommend this, because what we don't want to have happen is our employees not taken care of, and or a different version of that someone is in a situation where they should be quarantined and they choose to come to work anyway because they're put in a position of not being covered. But Jen would probably cover that in others as she makes a presentation to you supporting this recommendation.
Sure. So again, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA, it went into act April 1, and it was mandated. It wasn't an option for employers that had within a certain range of employees. It did expire December 31. We were waiting on pins and needles to see if there would be an extension or if there would be a new act that would replace it, but there has not been. So what it covers is employees who are quarantined or in isolation. They are eligible for up to 80 hours, and that would be full and part-time employees, up to 80 hours of their regular compensation while they're off. These employees are those folks that aren't able to work remotely. So we've had 51 people total up to this point that have had some type of the emergency paid sick leave. Maybe not the full 80, depending on their schedule, like a firefighter. You know, it just kind of depends, but 51 of those employees, that's not a lot. We've had a lot of other people that have been able to work remote during a quarantine. And we've only had a handful of folks that fall under that isolation. So the isolation is when people actually are positive for COVID-19. Quarantine is due to exposure, whether it be in your household or somewhere else. But again, if people are able to work remotely, they don't receive those hours. They just continue to work from home. The expanded FMLA, and they didn't expand the amount of time, it's still up to 12 weeks. But what they did expand is the definition of what qualifies, and then also normal FMLA does not pay people. So they expanded it so that if someone was unable to have daycare, or if their child's school went remote and they needed to be home with their dependents, they could qualify for the FMLA at 2/3 pay during that time. And again, that only happened for people that were unable to work remote. So we did have a lot of folks that had kids working or doing their schoolwork from home, but they were able to do their work from home as well. So they didn't actually need to tap into the expanded FMLA. So the city and BPW, we've all talked about this quite a bit. We've had a lot of meetings, and we do recommend extending this voluntarily and having that new cutoff date is March 31, 2021. And just like Keith said, we feel like it'll protect our employees and our community from the spread of COVID-19. And so we feel an obligation, and we feel like it's the right thing to do because we are definitely not out of the woods, as you all know. As outlined in the original FFCRA, 80 hours is the max that somebody can get of that emergency paid sick leave. So if someone's already received it and then they get quarantined again, they can't get additional hours. So we're not recommending additional hours. We're just saying the people that haven't used it all or haven't had to use it at all would still qualify until March 31.
Great. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Any questions from council? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on this item.
Move we approve.
Moved by Peters. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Raymond. Any discussion? Seeing none, Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Corbin,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Next is communications from the city manager. I know what time it is.
Yeah, I'll go relatively quick here tonight. Just so you're aware that we have been shooting videos. You'll recall that when the departments do our reports on looking back at highlights of 2020 and the first 6 months of fiscal year 21, and then we talk about kind of current situations and downloading our perspectives on moving forward and budgets for fiscal year 22. We usually kind of have a rotating crew of people in the hot seat that make that presentation to you. And I don't think anyone wants to do that by Zoom next week, Wednesday nights. So we've utilized videos. So even though we'll still do it by Zoom next week, we hope that the video is kind of a nice added twist that will communicate that information, I think, even better. So look for that next week, Wednesday night at our study session at 5:30. And we're looking forward to it. We think it's going to be really positive.
Great. Is that it?
Great.
That's it. If you got questions, throw them at me, call me, email me. I'm available. I miss seeing everybody, before and after meetings and just those happenstances. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have anything.
Great. Thank you. Next item, communications and appointments from the mayor. I do have appointment, and that it's that I recommend that the city council approve the appointment of Greg Berry and the reappointment of Luciano Hernandez V to the Holland Satellite Smart Zone LDFA board, terms to expire December 31 of 2024, and the resignation of Dana, I'm going to kill Dana's name, is it Kumar? From the Holland Satellite Smart Zone LDFA board, effective June 10, 2016. And I would accept a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Arnshorst. Any discussion? Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Raymond,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Corbin,
Yes.
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And then I just have one item of communication. If you've been seeing letters to the editor in the Sentinel, and I'm sure you've all been receiving numerous emails in regard to the Unified Development Ordinance process, I just wanted to give council an update on what's going on with that. We had a couple of sessions for public comment, and then had an opportunity on December 22nd where the Planning Commission actually had an opportunity to respond to that public comment and make some additional recommendations for changes to the Unified Development Ordinance that haven't, and those recommendations haven't been reflected in recent communication and recent letters to the editor. So I wanted council, even though it's not before you yet, to have an idea so you can relay to constituents just a couple of the big highlights that came out of that meeting. When we met on the 22nd, the Planning Commission recommended allowing attached auxiliary dwelling units into what is currently the R1 district. If you read a lot of the communications, people were concerned about duplexes in R1, multifamily units in R1. Planning Commission definitely heard that from the public and said, no, we are not going to allow unoccupied multiple dwelling units in that R1 district, which will be renamed LDR, which is low density residential. But what we did say is, we do think it's okay for someone to add an auxiliary dwelling unit. We already do allow unattached auxiliary dwelling units, but Planning Commission said we're going to allow, our recommendation is anyway, to allow attached auxiliary dwelling units. So think of the mother-in-law apartment, or if you have, say, a developmentally disabled child who can live partially on their own but not completely separated, you could convert part of your dwelling to allow for that additional dwelling unit, but it is required. The recommendation is that it requires that one of those units be owner occupied. We also, to allow for additional communication with the neighbors, have recommended that if someone is applying to do an auxiliary dwelling unit, that notice is given to the residents within that 300-foot radius that we do now. It doesn't automatically require a Board of Appeals hearing, but if any one of the residents who does receive that notice, or anyone asks for a Board of Appeals hearing for that auxiliary dwelling unit request, that there be a Board of Appeals hearing for that. And staff is working on that language based on that recommendation from the Planning Commission. And also one of the things that I want, the other question that came up, there's a property that we voted on as city council members at the corner of Lincoln and 40th Street. Where there was a request for a gas station to be there. That property was going to be changed from being what it's currently zoned, which I'm trying to remember what it's currently zoned, but it's going to be changed to residential mixed use. One of the allowable uses for residential mixed use on a special use permit would have been a gas station. The neighbors in the surrounding area were not happy about the fact that the UDO might allow a gas station to come in there. What Planning Commission then decided to do is recommended that gas stations not be allowed anywhere in the residential mixed use zoning district. So that would not be an allowed use on that property. So anyone who's in that 40th and Lincoln area who's concerned that there might be a gas station on that spot, the recommendation of Planning Commission is no. We do not recommend that gas stations be allowed in the residential mixed use. And if anyone says to you, hey, I'm worried that a developer is going to come in and purchase my property the property next to me, and I'm currently in R1, and they're going to tear down my neighbor's house, and they're going to build a duplex there, and they're going to rent out both sides of it. That is not the recommendation of Planning Commission. Planning Commission has said in LDR, which is currently R1, the only way you can add an additional unit is if it's an auxiliary dwelling unit that is attached, and one of the units has to be owner occupied, because what we heard loud and clear from the residents in R1 is that they wanted to make sure that the people who were in there that were owning properties in their neighborhood lived in their neighborhood. And so those are the recommendations that are out to Planning Commission, or excuse me, to staff right now. They're going to be coming back with language. We're going to continue to be discussing it over the next few months. That whole big package will be coming to City Council, and we'll have the opportunity to review and chew on that as well. But Planning Commission listened to the public, responded to the public, and the language is being amended appropriately. And Lynn, I don't know if you want to tag onto that at all. If I missed anything that's important, I know we talked about some other issues, but those were the big burning ones that I heard the most about.
Yeah, I think those are definitely the ones that we made adjustments to. There are still several that we'll be continuing to talk about, but those were the big ones. Yeah.
All right, great. And that's all I have. Are there any communications from council members?
Yeah,
Yes.
Unless the strategic development team report, unless Scott, do you want to take this?
Go ahead, Councilman Answer.
Are you sure? Thank you. Well, there was a meeting of the SDT, the Strategic Development Team, Monday, and I will update you on it. I'm going to start with a little cheerleading because it may seem like nothing's happening. So I will say that there are smart people who do their homework, and I think we all work together well. Even we're on a Zoom format, and staff has been more than supportive. We continue to be buried in data, and so we're trying to pick our way through mounds of information. So far, no goals have been set. We're still learning. And much progress, as we are establishing, much progress has been accomplished over the last 10 years by Holland BPW. This is evidenced in the history of the Community Energy Plan, CEP, and the SDT. And that first part of that report has already started to be written. It also shows that the Energy Park appears to be a very successful part of the response for a community energy plan at this point. We began to discuss the BPW's energy portfolio regarding the merits and economics of wind, solar, coal, and so on. So I feel we must determine that sweet spot between what we value. For instance, do we think it will make a difference in global warming, and the economics that we feel comfortable with? So next meeting, we will listen to a speaker on carbon offsets and also see what other cities are doing in this area. So it's clear that the world is moving toward renewables as a source of energy, from car companies to wind and solar to reduction of fossil fuels. I know that we as a team eventually will come up with a plan that we can get the community fired up about, whether home retrofits or recycling or building codes. And this will have to be a community effort as well as involving the city and the BPW. So in that spirit, we thank everyone for all their emails and letters and support at this point. So thank you. 2 weeks, we'll have another meeting.
Thank you, Nikki.
You're welcome.
Any other communications from council members?
I think Scott had something, didn't you, Scott?
I just had I want to first, Councilman Raymond and Mayor Fox, thank you as a planning commission for listening to the constituents. I know you guys always do, but in this particular case, many of those issues that we brought forward were in Ward 5, and so I really appreciate you listening to the concerns. It means a lot to not only them but to me as well. What I will also say, if you could somehow get us some bullet points from the planning commission, or excuse me, from the planning division, neighborhood or whoever needs to build those talking points of the things you just mentioned in your box, that would be very helpful for us to be able to communicate that back out to the community that continue to ask us questions. I wrote them down, but I want to make sure I get it right. So,
yeah, I've got an email that I sent to Nikki this morning in response to a specific question from a constituent. So I'll just copy that and send it out to the entire council that outlines what it was that I just talked about.
It was very helpful.
Reinforce what Nikki had mentioned was there are some very talented people on this SDT. So they're very talented and they're really, really looking hard at our energy portfolio. So I agree with her. We have a great team going forward. So thank you for that report.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other communications from council members? Seeing none, I believe there's one more motion that I'm willing to entertain this evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Peters. All those say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks. See you next week.